Hey everybody, welcome back to my treehouse. In our last video, we talked about identifying trees as you might see them in the winter or early spring. In this video, I'm going to add some more trees to your list for study, but I also want to point out a lot of other things that are now coming into fruition or blooming, like the flowers or the lichens or even caterpillars and frogs. So there are lots of things happening now, just 2 weeks after my last video, and you don't have to live in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont to find these creatures. They exist in many parts of the northeastern United States and in eastern Canada and maybe other places too. So I hope everyone can use this video to find these creatures outdoors. Make sure it's safe to do so, but if you have a backyard with some trees and bushes and some rocks and some rotting logs, you'll probably find the things that we're going to be talking about in this video. It's time for the wakening of the woolly bears. At this time of year, those little moths that spend their winters dressed like this will finally wake up and start to turn into the Isabella tiger moth species that will fly around this spring. But you may have seen a woolly bear caterpillar just like this all winter long. They're one of the few creatures that you can easily identify in the middle of the winter while they're hibernating in your firewood pile or maybe in your backyard on your porch. So the woolly bears, see if you can find them walking around at this time of year. Can you hear them? 2 days ago, this pond had ice floating in it, and now the leopard frog. What did he say? That's wrong! He's wrong! The leopard frogs are all auditioning for, I don't know, Pond's Got Talent. These frogs are all singing right now, hoping to find a mate. This is the leopard frog species. Correction! Correction! When Bobby said he was listening to the northern leopard frogs of the species Lithobates pipiens, he was actually listening to wood frogs of the species Lithobates sylvaticus. Get it right, Bobby. And I bet tonight this pond will be filled with singing peepers. Maybe we'll have to come back when it gets dark to hear those. But already many animals are coming to life, starting to look for mates, and the season has fully sprung, even though there was ice on this pond 2 days ago. Here we have some of the first flowers of spring. Coltsfoot, not to be confused with dandelions. I know you expect to see those soon, but those are about a month away. Coltsfoot is a flower that comes out much earlier than dandelions, and it grows in a place that you might not think flowers would like to grow. This is a ditch on the side of a road. This is not a garden. This is not a place that is nicely kept. This is a place with a lot of disturbance, gravel, sand, erosion constantly happening here, and for some reason Coltsfoot plants love this environment. These little flowers are actually related to daisies, and they're not native to North America. So they probably came here as seeds hidden in the soles of the shoes of European folks that came to live in America long ago. And now they're everywhere on the ditches, on the sides of the roads, and gravel pits, especially in places where there's a lot of disturbed ground. These flowers, once they get pollinated and make their little seeds, they will disappear, and then later in the spring and in the summer you will see the leaves of Coltsfoot. So Coltsfoot flowers and leaves come out at very separate times. This is why you might have a hard time identifying this plant. In the summer when you see the leaves, you may not recognize them as having anything to do with this bright yellow flower. And why do they call it Coltsfoot? Well, I don't know. Maybe these look like little young horses' legs, but actually I think it's when the leaves come out. The green leaf has the shape of a horse's footprint. But you won't see the leaves now, but you will get to see these beautiful yellow flowers. Here I have an example of one of my favorite conifers, an evergreen tree called cedar. But cedar is a confusing name because there are many types of trees called cedars. This is not related to the cedars of Lebanon, and it's not even related to the red cedar that we see in southern Vermont and other parts of southern New England. This is eastern white cedar, and it's actually a close cousin to cypress trees. And like a lot of cypress trees, it likes to grow near water. So you're likely to find cedars next to a stream or a pond or a river, and these leaves are rich in vitamin C. This is one of the reasons why this tree is called Arbor Vitae, which means the tree of life in Latin. Many times people have been saved by the bark and the needles of this tree because they have such rich vitamins and even starches in the bark that people have survived on eating the bark of this tree, the cambium layer underneath this peely part. And the leaves, you can make a tea from them that has more vitamin C than orange juice. And this was part of many times in history, including when Jacques Cartier, the French explorer, came to the Gaspé Peninsula and met the First Nations people of Canada. They saved his crew with a scurvy eliminating tea made from cedar leaves. So the tree of life, this particular tree, is one that you can easily identify. You can find the leaves, or you can find the little cones that to me resemble little wooden tulips. Cedars are very easy to identify by their needles, but they're not really needles. They look more like flat plates, like scales. They actually, to me, resemble little dreadlocks that are green. However, if you watch the cedars near your home, you may notice that most of their branches look like this. And that's because deer and other herbivores like to eat them, and especially deer can only reach so high. So the branches that have leaves close to the ground might be denuded, and the ones that are higher up might be the only ones that still have leaves on them. There are lots of species of lichens. Don't confuse them with mosses. In fact, mosses are actually just small green plants. Lichens are something totally different. And on this rotting piece of timber here, I've got lots of species of lichens, but one that you can easily identify are the ones called British soldiers. What is this, the Battle of Yorktown? They are kind of gray, but with a red top that kind of resembles a bright red soldier's helmet. So if you can see those, then you know you've got that species. But what is it? A lichen is actually two things living together, a fungus and an algae or a cyanobacteria. So I want you to imagine that lichens are like little tiny farmers or farms. The fungus builds the structure, the fungus mines the minerals, and then it cultivates in itself little plants like algae or cyanobacteria that can do photosynthesis. And those photosynthesizing bacteria and algae would not be able to survive in this environment without the fungus supporting them. So imagine that this is kind of like a little biodome, a little biosphere, and creatures that would die in the cold or in the dry conditions on this rotting timber can actually survive if they're living inside of a lichen. So a lichen is a relationship between two very different kinds of creatures. That's not what a moss is. A moss is just a plant. And in addition to the British soldiers, another lichen that you can easily identify at this time of year is another one with a great name, the pixie cups. So maybe you can get some pixie cups to serve libations to your British soldiers, and if you find both of these lichens, you're on your way to discovering this amazing world of symbiotic creatures. Here we have a deciduous tree, a hardwood tree, that is very important in our forest, but it now is also under a new kind of danger. This is a white ash tree. Now in Vermont, we might have lots of ash trees. We have black ash, green ash, and white ash trees, but on this place where I live, I've only been able to find white ash trees. Now, these trees are beautiful and very important even in ancient mythologies. Some of you who are fans of Norse mythology, or maybe just fans of the Thor character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have heard that There's an ash tree that binds the worlds together. It's called Yggdrasil, the world tree that connects Midgard with Asgard and all the other realms in Norse mythology. And if you study the folklore of the Abenaki people, there's stories that say that people came from ash trees. So in many different cultures, ash trees are very important. Like a lot of our trees, ashes look very different when they're young than when they get older. And when they're young, their bark is fairly smooth and not that easy to tell apart from some of the other trees like the maples. However, the easiest way to tell an ash apart from all the other trees in our forest is by looking at the leaf scars on the twigs where the leaves fell off last fall. One of the things you'll notice about ash trees is that they're very chunky on the twig. That's because their leaves are huge. They have compound leaves that have very complicated parts, so the leaf has to be anchored very tightly to the twig. So the branch, the twig, everything has to be big on an ash tree. But where the last leaf fell off is called the leaf scar, and this little tiny nub right next to the leaf scar is next year's set of leaves. So when you look at the leaf scar, you can see that on an ash tree, the leaf scar tends to look a little bit like a crescent moon or like a smile. If it was a green ash or a black ash, it would have a different shape. The white ash is best told by this leaf scar or by other things like the leaves and the bark. But when you have a small ash tree, this might be all you have to work with. Here we have an ash tree that's just starting to get that diamond-shaped pattern in its bark. White ash trees, they have this pattern that emerges when they get big enough. When they're young, their bark is smooth, but when they're older, you start to see these diamond-shaped gaps in the bark that becomes even more pronounced when they're large and older trees. Well, white ash trees can get very large. And once they get this big, it's very easy to tell them apart from the other trees in the woods just because of the diamond-shaped pattern made by their bark. I should know, I spend a lot of time up close to an ash tree. This is the tree that holds my tree house. All right, here is a flower that you should be looking for. These are hazelnut bushes, and this is a catkin. That's just a type of flower. Catkin comes from the Dutch word for a kitten, and in some cases they really do look like they belong to cats. But this one here is less fuzzy than other catkins. This hazelnut has a part that makes pollen. That's the male part of this plant. Its female part is actually a separate flower on a separate part of the plant that doesn't look anything like the catkins. Instead, it looks like a bunch of red tendrils sticking up in the air. So here you have a plant where the male part and the female part are separated on two different parts of the plant. This is similar to corn, where the top of the corn is the tassels that make the pollen, and the corn silk near the leaves is where the seeds, the cobs, come, and that is similar to how hazelnuts grow. But if you've never noticed the hazelnuts on these trees, that's because they disappear very quickly. Every animal, every turkey, every squirrel, every chipmunk wants to eat them, and you will be unlikely to find many to eat. But they are edible, and they are very closely related to the hazelnuts that you might buy at the store. So yes, we have hazelnuts in Vermont, and yes, they are blooming now. If you're looking for hazelnuts, don't expect them to be growing on big trees. These trees that produce hazelnuts for our climate are more like little bushes, and they don't usually get much taller or much bigger than this. Don't mistake them for the big apple tree in the background. That's a large tree, but our hazelnuts never get too big. But those little catkins are the easiest way to tell them apart right now. If you remember from my last video, the quaking aspen, the poplar tree, Populus tremuloides, well, last time, 2 weeks ago, the flowers were just beginning to emerge, but now you can see them a lot more prominently. And this is the kind of flower called a catkin, like that Dutch word that means kitten. And this definitely looks like something that belongs on the toes or the tail of a kitty cat. but it's actually a flower, and in this case it's a male flower that's going to be making pollen. The female flowers may be emerging, but they're just not quite as developed yet, so they're not as obvious, and they will have the pistils, and the female flowers will make the seeds. So it's just like in other flowers, except that they're two separate structures and they're not always together on the same branch. Of all the trees associated with catkins, or looking like they belong to something on a cat, the pussy willow takes the prize. After all, that's what we call it. But you see these little flowers? They are male flowers. They will make pollen, and if you watch them over time, they will have lots of stamens that will be covered in yellow pollen. They will give themselves away, but unlike other plants, this willow is completely dioecious, which means its female is on a different plant. This is a bachelor willow. It does not have any female flowers, which means it's hoping that its pollen will find a mate. And all the years I've lived here, I have not yet found a female willow nearby, so I'm a little sorry for this heartbroken bachelor. Well, I guess I was right. This is a different pond, but it's filled with peepers. Just a couple of days ago, there was snow on the ground, and now these amphibians are singing so loud, you might not be able to hear me speaking. You might also hear the red-winged blackbird that's hanging out in this cattail marsh. They just arrived here from a long migration, and they're getting ready to build their nests in our habitat here. It's crazy to think that those peepers are frogs about the size of this part of my thumb. They never get bigger than that, and all winter they were frozen in the leaf litter, probably under the trees up the hill from there, and those peepers survived frozen in the ground, and then they came out, found this pond, and started having a singing contest to see which will win their mates' hearts. So this is something that you should be able to find very easily if you have any wetlands near where you live.